We now move to the next session. I'm pleased to invite Vikram Sridharji, and he will talk about snakes and reptiles in Indian folk tales. Ah, from where to where we are going to jump into another universe altogether. Um, Vikram Sridhar, he's a performance storyteller, theater practitioner, and he's combining his various interests and work in conservation, social work. He's been in theater, all this over the last 20 years. His stories, workshops, performance for children, adults, and families are rooted in heritage, ecology, and folklore. He strongly believes that his story a day keeps the doctor away, not just an apple. Thank you, Vikramji. I welcome you.
நாதர் முடி மேலிருக்கும் நாகப்பாம்பே, நச்சு பையை வைத்திருக்கும் நல்ல பாம்பே, பாதாளத்தில் குடி புகும் பைக்குள் பாம்பே, பாடி ஆடி நின்று விளையாடு பாம்பே, ஆடு பாம்பே, விளையாடு பாம்பே, ஆடு பாம்பே, விளையாடு பாம்பே. Thanks to Indika, Shivakumarji, Deepa, and Nagaraji for creating space. And all of you listen, because there's no listener, there is no teller, and there is no heart-to-heart conversation. This song that I sang, Aadu Pambe, Vilayadu Pambe, talks about the snake, especially the cobra, and this is a popular song by a Siddhar called the Pambati Siddhar down south in Tamil Nadu, who belonged to the Jogi tribe. And once upon a time, he was a snake catcher, or what we call rescuer. And all the songs are rooted in snakes and ecology and to the soil. And if you look at our itihasas, Puranas, and many cultures and classical texts, you'll find animals, flowers, and trees that have been considered very sacred. And snakes have been most significant in them in our culture. From Takshaka to Kaliyamardini to Rahu, snakes find their place in many forms. And not even snakes, but the other reptiles, which I shall talk in the next few minutes. And snakes association don't even end there. Snakes and trees. Snakes and trees, that's so many. And look at the Harappan civilization and what has been taken from the soil that belonged to the Harappan civilization. You'll find a tree guarding the Shami tree. And go around the city, whichever you are in, especially in Bangalore and Chennai, where I've lived my life, you will find in a corner a tree, and the tree exists because there is a small snake worship that's happening, which is called the katte. Well, snakes and reptiles go a long way in a text. And reptiles, very simple. Look at our dragons. Look at the word dragon. Look at any dragon that just comes to your mind. And for that, I'm going to ask you to look around your room. You will find one reptile right in your room that might freak you or give a smile to you. And that is being taken as inspiration to the dragons that we talk about. And every dragon that is there has been inspired from the reptiles. The snake or the crocodiles or the lizards in some way. Their tails, their mouth, and Vritra, the story of Indra killing Vritrasura, and how Vritra takes away all the water and Indra has to come and vanquish Vritra to take back. And the other story, the Gajendra Moksha. And while Gajendra Moksha talks about Indradyumna coming and reincarnating as this elephant to fight against his Ahankara and the crocodile pulling the leg, whereas the folklore and the folk tale that's parallel to this talks about how the elephant got its trunk not far away. Somewhere in Assam, the story is told. Somewhere in Africa, the story is told. But the elephant and the crocodile is the same. Did folklore influence classical or classical influence folktale? It's a cycle, isn't it? And every time you look at this classical text, these characters characters, these species have certain superpowers or special powers. Before Spider-Man and Batman were evolved, these were our special powers and super characters. The five-headed snake and many, many, many such imagery that can come to our mind. And we look at the folktale world, we will see how the reptile, as the snakes and the crocodiles and the tortoise, are the ones which are very closest to the earth. And they'll talk, every time they talk, they'll talk about the relationship that we have with the earth, because the reptiles have the shortest leg or sometimes no leg to the earth. They are in sync with the earth, isn't it? They touch the soil. And that's how these folk tales will also emerge and talk about them if we listen to them with our hearts and our souls. And animal in Indian folk tales tradition has been documented by many folklorists, A.K. Ramanujam, K. Rajanaran, Vijayant Desai. And every time they document, a lot of times in English translation, what is local ecology becomes just a single word called the snake or the tortoise or the crocodile. Is it the is it the sand boa or is it the cobra? I wouldn't know just reading it in English sometime. And that's when a little closer into folktale from the land it evolves is important. And there are two types of creatures in Indian folktales which have been used to create fear, because these two create death in abundance before electricity came and before we even had, when cities were not cities. Banagata, which very close to Bangalore, I've rescued and seen a lot of wildlife even few years back. The tigers and the snakes or the crocodile. Look at the tigers in our folktales. They will be the ones who create havoc, because the mammal or the cat family used to be around the city, many wherever city, and they used to create death as well as the snakes, because these two created maximum death among humans. Whereas other creatures could be evaded by various measures, but these two were deadly in a certain way. And when you look at that, you have to look at animals in indigenous cultures. And every time you look at them in indigenous culture, they'll also be worshipped. The tigers and the snakes will be worshipped because they thought they were coming to kill them. And the stories and the folktales will reflect them in a certain way. But what snake, which tiger? Is it the tiger or the leopard? A little closer sometimes we fail to go into. And this coexistence with nature has always reflected in the folktales of our country. There is no humans without nature. There is no animals. Are we the animals? Are the animals a part of us? As always is this cycle. Because a lot of folktales, you'll find 4 or 5 characters and a human somewhere in between that. And this coexistence is reiterated every time. And understanding their behavior is important to understand the folktale, because it is just not a tiger. It's just not a snake. It's much beyond that. And that tale evolves out of a lot of understanding and emotion to our nature. And understanding their behavior is equally important. Snakes and reptiles in India. Well, before we even get into this word reptile, as a practitioner, yes, I'm not an academician, I'm just a practitioner. A lot of times we really don't understand. Yes, we learned it in school, but sometimes it's important to pause and look at these just as pure definitions. There are just 3 reptiles that exist: the crocodilia, the testudians, and the squamata. And according to the Zoological Survey of India, India has 3 crocodiles: the marsh, the saltwater, and the gharial. And then there are these different snakes, like the numbers I've mentioned, and they've changed over time. Even every 10 years, every 5 years, we're discovering new and new. And the lizards and the snake belong to one family. The turtles and tortoises belong to one family, but are the tortoises and the turtles the same? Are the lizards and the snake the same? Do we give the same relationship to the lizard and the snake? Why? How? Stereotypes and biases. And the same thing with the crocodiles. And with that, I'm going to take into the big 4. As much as we think every snake, and every time we look at a snake, what does it evoke in us? And that is only the 4 of the snake, they say the big 4, which creates death. And of that, only the Russell viper can put down. And 40 to 50% of deaths in India is only because of the Russell's viper. But what do we do to the other snakes in our stories? What do we create that aura in in the stories about these snakes as if they're deadly? No, are humans deadly or snakes deadly? And the snake bite has been studied multiple times, and there's enough anti-venom research going on. And that's why it's important to look at the local origin of the folk tale to see where the snake is and which snake are we talking about in the folk tale. A folk tale from Assam having a snake is not the same as a folk tale from Andhra having a snake. A tortoise in Kashmir is not the same as a tortoise in Tamil Nadu. And that is a responsibility of the teller and also the listener sometimes to question it. The Panchatantra is a source of animal tales. Why is it important? Because if I have to ask you 3 stories that you remember from your childhood days, you will tell me mostly, think about it. It would be the hare and the tortoise, which is not the Panchatantra. The other is the crocodile and the monkey. And the third, the mongoose and the snake. The mongoose and the snake and the crocodile and the monkey is from the Panchatantra. And these two have the reptile as a key animal source. As much as there is zoological mythology, which talks about animals in mythology, what I define slowly will be the ethological tales, which talks about the animals by themselves. And the story of the mongoose and the snake even finds a mention in the Silapadigaram. When Kovalan is coming back, he sees the mongoose. And the influence of this in world culture is immense. You go to a country, you will find the story in another form. You might have the tiger instead of the snake, and you might have the other animals into the snake in the stories. And a quote from Kakolukyam, the 3rd chapter that talks about war and peace, says this following quote: Sprishan napi gajo hanti, jidran napi bujanga mama, hasan napi nrupo hanti, manayan napi durjanah. An elephant kills by touch. It's a loose translation. An elephant kills by touch, a snake by the breath, a king or the ruler by the laugh tongue, king, queen, ruler by the laugh tongue, and a scoundrel by putting garlands or decorations. And this, to understand this quote, is a simple line, but does a snake always kill by the breath? We need to understand the snake a little more. When, how, and do we provoke these snakes? Do the snakes provoke us or we provoke the snakes? And that's important to understand the text of these classical sources, which are very deeply ingrained to our soil. And to understand each line, I think it will take a lifetime. And for that, I'm opening this word called ethology. And ethology is study of animal behavior. And snakes and reptiles have, in every story, you'll find the reptile with another species. And mongoose and the snake, they say the mongoose has a little bit of anti-venom, and the ethological behavior is called mobbing. If you look at the story and many other folk tales, you'll find the mongoose or the other species tilting their head and facing the snake. And that is mobbing, and mobbing is a way that snakes encounter or counter in the wildlife. And 2 communities which I've studied in my travels and my understanding is the Kalbelias and the Irulas. And if you see this, you might understand what I'm talking about. They're not snake catchers, they're snake rescuers. They're not people who take snakes and take away the fangs, as popularly told, but they're the ones who lead them back into the jungle and the forest. They're the ones who are gentle even now to them. And the Kalbelias have stories of snakes which are annoyed of humans and go away from the land. Once there was a king, and this king wanted to punish a snake, and he sends everybody, the Kalbelias, to the snake, and the Kalbelias go and play what we call the magudi or the pungi, and the snake gives 2 gold coins and never leaves it, and again 2 gold coins and doesn't leave. And finally what happens is the story. And the Irulas have stories of the tiger, whereas a cat and a cat teaches a tiger to climb the tree, but doesn't teach it to climb down the tree, because tiger and snake here represents the society in many ways in their stories. And these tales are there in our cultural spaces, but the origin of these will be a folk tale. Like the Naga Mandala, a ritual in coastal Karnataka, and also the play by Girish Karnad. When I attended his lectures and talks, I asked him, why did the Nagmandala influence you so much? And he said, Ekya told me the story, and he goes back into this tale. And the tale over time became a ritual, or the ritual led to the tale, is again the human cycle. And many of these tales, they're shown as oppressors and villains, but also have divinity in them. And I have two stories that I heard from two communities. One is the Halaki women, again near Gokarna, and one from my grandmother. There lived a snake and a mongoose, and a farmer once was walking and looked at that. He looked at that and looked at the mongoose cutting the snake, eating the snake, giving it back to life. He went back, cut his wife, but she didn't come back to life. I asked the women, why did this happen? And she said, men have never understood women. Matadu, matadu, mallige. And she finished that tale. And the second tale is from a grandmother, my own grandmother, where she says, once there were two kids born, one was a snake and one was a baby. They kept the snake in the kitchen and the baby for naming ceremony. They put a hot vessel on the snake died, the baby also died. I leave this tale for you to interpret. Why did a grandmother tell the story? Is up to us. Many errors in the way we talk about reptiles. Is it venom or poison? Is it turtles or tortoise? Is it crocodiles or alligators? Every word has strength, and every word not used properly is an abuse to nature. I conclude, I think I'm on a little bit over time. These reptile stories have feminine expression if you listen to them. And the English translation loses them, and sometimes you need to go back to nature to listen to them. And stereotyping and biases, the stories we heard create the world of today, and the stories we hear today create the world of tomorrow. And to understand, go back to ecology. And this is me rescuing a snake, and I finish with this quote. Jiveshu karuna chapi maitri teshu vidiyata. Be compassionate and friendly to all living beings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vikramji. I think you brought out the complexity of stories in India, in diversity rather, in terms of, in fact, in the modern world, particular aspects gets over highlighted, and that is how we remember some dimensions of our past, whereas the tradition itself has been multidimensional in the way it has looked at everything. There is not one thing that it has looked at from in a positive or negative way universally. I think a good it would be very interesting to see how the same object is represented in multiple ways, in multiple stories and traditional. I think the geography part that you brought out also is extremely important. I think there's a lot more pearl that needs to be unearthed in this direction. While Vikramji was narrating this story, I was reminded of another story where a sannyasi comes and tells a biting snake to not bite. And finally, he returns, and the snake is browbeaten by the society. And the sannyasi then advises that you must hiss at least. I think that story really represents the entire complexity, with which our tradition has seen. It recognizes the fang and the poison, but we have nurtured saints who can speak to the snake and soften it. And the saints are not blind, they're not asking you to commit a suicide. You have to protect yourselves as well. It's a beautiful story. I was reminded of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vikram. Wonderful, wonderful to hear you.